Good morning, guys. We'll be checking out the interview with the boys by Marshall from Runeterra report Twitter. Probably there is some new info about the new cards rotating, so we'll be checking that out.
A quick apology before the video starts. My mic had a few issues during the interview. Luckily, this didn't impact any of John's or Greg's audio, just my own. Any section which I deemed unusable, I completely removed and did voiceovers for, and any sections that I think should have been kept in, I will have added subtitles to. Apart from that, without further ado, enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to the Runeterra Report. Today we're sitting down with both Greg Travitz and John Morman, and we're going to be talking about the variety sets, which, as of today's recording, came out exactly one. So guys, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Riot?
Sure, yeah. I'm Greg. I'm a producer on the Legends of Runeterra team, specifically on what we call the cards team. I'm kind of one of the producers that is in charge of delivering sets. So when you have a full set release with champions, every once in a while, one of those will be produced by me. And then I'm also the producer on variety sets and live balance right now, as we're kind of like changing our philosophy around those with introducing variety sets. And as a producer, my job is, as you'll see when I defer things to John Morman over here, my job is not to design the cards. My job is not to make design decisions with live balance or variety sets. My job is to help set the vision, kind of create the product strategy, and then make sure that we deliver it on time, on budget, and within the parameters that we kind of set out at the beginning for our product goals. So while like most of the answers that you'll hear me speak to are those like kind of like larger long-term vision items, as well as how do we actually do the thing. And then I'll pass to John for his intro about what he can speak to.
Yeah, I'm John. I'm a game designer on Legends of Runeterra, specifically working on the cards team. I do a lot of thinking about cards, designing cards, playtesting cards, being told by Greg that I need to get my cards done, that sort of stuff. Yeah, all those things Greg says he doesn't do, that's pretty much what we do.
So, to start this off, we did a post about both on Twitter and Reddit, and I pulled questions from the community, just so it's not from questions from myself. So questions that are going to be asked are directly from part of the community. Reddit. Start off, what are the variety sets? But maybe you've stopped playing the game for a while and just come back to the game. Would you like to explain what they are and what the goal of the variety set is?
Yeah, so I'll start and then I'll pass it to John for this one. So when we think about kind of our overall product strategy, if you will, we for a long time we pretty much focused entirely on creating full sets with champions and associated cards with those champions, as well as what we call internally and now we're calling externally variety cards. The champions and the associated champions are just what you would expect, just the champions and then the followers that come with those champions. But then we also have variety cards or callback cards or any of those, which are basically ones that aren't necessarily associated with the champions that are being released, but are there to either call back to previous archetypes, expansions, things like that we've done, or could be new cards that are there to help various different things. And kind of what we found over the last multiple years of doing this is that variety cards have done their job, but they haven't really been able to like shine as individual moments because they've been overshadowed by exciting champions that are being released. You know, when we come out with new champions, everyone's focused on wanting to play them and wanting to kind of build decks around those champions, and not necessarily focused on variety cards as much as they could be if they were released separately. So what did we do? We decided to release them separately. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them that we're looking at are being created and then also released separately from the individual sets that we are creating. So long and short of it, what variety sets are is they are additional variety cards that are being released separately from sets, either before or after the set that they're being created with. And then to kind of go further with your question around variety sets is in terms of what the goals are, one of the things that we kind of rethought as we built the new cadence that we've talked about over the last couple months of live balance variety sets and then kind of resetting that cycle is that we want to have very specific and set out product goals for each of those, and we want those to be distinct and different. And so live balance is just what you would kind of think is we're looking to balance the game, and I'll kind of come back to that word balance at some point. We kind of discuss what that actually means, but in terms of that is like what we're looking to do in theory. And then when we bring out variety sets, the main goal for those is to revive old archetypes, maybe bring something into the picture that makes champions that we haven't seen in a while more exciting to play or more exciting to build a deck around. And then sets are what they've always been, is new champions and associated followers and really big splashes that kind of make an impact on players' deck building abilities and just new archetypes that have never existed before. So that's what are variety sets, and then what are our kind of goals of those. And then I'll pass to John to kind of talk a little bit about kind of the design philosophy behind this as well.
Yeah, I think Greg covered a lot of it. A big part of this, though, is that we want to keep everything feeling fresh in our game, and kind of staggering our releases like this lets us get more opportunities to shake up the meta and keep things from getting stale. Greg talked a little bit about balance philosophy, and one of our big things about that is we don't want things to feel the same all the time, because then even if everything is perfectly balanced and every deck has a very even win rate, if nothing is changing, it doesn't feel like the game is exciting, and you don't have a good reason to go back and play more. So by kind of letting us spread out our releases like this, we actually get to create more opportunities to shake things up and kind of unsettle the meta. I think it's an interesting thing about the way we release cards is also we get to do it in a different way each time. Our sets introduce a new champion, they shake things up with a brand new archetype. Our balance patches let us go back and look at older cards that maybe need a little bit of tuning up or tuning down and kind of shake things up that way. And then variety sets let us introduce these kind of specific tools that we think can help change things up. I think the most recent variety set was really focused on kind of like pushing in on an idea of what each region does best and like what they can do going forward. There's a couple cards that were also a little bit of wild cards in there. Priestess of Desert Light is not necessarily what Shurima's going to be doing all the time, but it's a cool thing that Shurima can do. And as we go forward, we're going to look at other ways that variety sets can kind of like open those doors in small ways. I think Greg really hit the nail on the head when he was talking about how a lot of times we'd release variety cards alongside new champions, and they kind of get lost in the shuffle for a while. And then eventually someone would go back and experiment with them. But if they weren't like, meta breaking and amazing, they might just get lost. And by releasing them in their own release, we get a lot more experimentation. You get to see a lot more ways that a card can work. And often it makes more exciting decks because people just experiment with it more.
How are variety sets made? Can you share more about the thought process behind them and how you prioritize which archetypes will receive the new cards?
Well, we only ever buff the deep archetype because it's my favorite. So that's the real strategy behind it.
In charge
Giving
of
a window into the world. Exactly, yes. Yeah, in terms of how variety sets are made, and then I'll pass to John again for the archetype discussion. So the way that we kind of think about it and the way that we create the cards, I think actually I had a discussion on Twitter, or someone had actually brought up this on Twitter a little bit when we were discussing this back when we were releasing some information early on about variety sets, is that our goal is to create them kind of as part of the set itself, and then release them really close to when that set releases. So for example, we created these cards with one of the sets that we're working on, and then we released them early for that set. I think it's the one that's upcoming. We actually created these as part of that, and so those cards, without giving away anything, will actually speak a little bit to kind of what is coming in the next set. And when we make those, we have in mind kind of how that set is upcoming. And some of the things that we're going to really push on in the next year, and you'll start to see that kind of slowly ramp up over the next part of the year, is we might actually start to think about that not just from a design perspective like we did with this one, but maybe from art, maybe from narrative. And so you might end up seeing some stories start and then continue as you start to actually hit the set, or maybe the set will come out and then the one after it will continue some stories from the set before it. And so we really want to be able to play around with some of the the design, the narrative, the art, and tell kind of the stories across multiple sets, not just like, oh, hey, this mechanic works with this mechanic, which is kind of where we are now. And then as we move forward, we want to try and push and pull on some of those other cool areas that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, and I think that co-creation is really important for making the variety sets feel cohesive with the cards that are going to come afterwards. In this case, we know rotation's coming up with our next release. We've talked a lot about that before. And so these cards were really built with rotation in mind. And in a lot of cases are things that we really felt like a region would need after rotation, or could help like establish where a region lies after we've kind of reviewed all the cards in the game and figured out where we want to focus regions going forward. I think you asked a question about how we choose which archetypes we buff as well, and like which ones we actually give new cards to. The loosest version of this is that like we want kind of every archetype to get its chance and to look forward. There are some archetypes that we know we don't want to be like the lead archetype in the meta, and so we kind of try to avoid pushing those a little too hard. But that doesn't mean we don't want you to have a chance to be able to play your favorite deck. And we want that favorite deck to kind of shift over time. Like I think you like elites, right? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm a big enjoyer of elites, which a lot of people don't like. But like with the new card that comes out, John knows from when I messaged him on Twitter, and the Vanguard was like one of my favorite cards for a while. A bad card, and then the bug fix, I was like, it just made it better. And Badger Bear comes out, and everything in life was perfect. No complaints from me.
Dude,
we want to be able to have your time.
Yeah, exactly. We want the people who love elites to get a chance to play elites. We don't want elites to be the best thing that ever existed forever. And so we kind of have to bounce things back and forth. Now, our timelines for when we make cards are fairly long. Like, we need to give enough time for all of the engineering to get checked and make sure there's no bugs. We need to give time for our artists to make the beautiful artwork that they make for the cards. So a lot of times when we're making cards, we don't necessarily know exactly what the meta looks like the day it's going to be released. We then go back and do like revalidation of everything we make. But if you take a particular like vein of what a card is targeted at, it's often decided kind of like well beforehand. So there can be times when, because of other live changes we make or something like that, it feels like we're doubling down on a particular archetype that's already good. But we do actually go back and do revalidation and that sort of stuff to make sure that we aren't pushing anything towards like absolutely overpowering stances as best we can. You never get 100% hit rate on that stuff, but we try very hard. So.
If I could just push kind of on one of the things that John said earlier, which was speaking a little bit about like
we could
balance
run
and how we think about balance.
times
He kind of
3.
touched on it, but I wanted to like talk a little bit more about that because I think it's a really interesting topic. I've been kind of a competitive, not a competitive gamer, but I've been playing games competitively for a long time. I played.
But Greg sounds complete normal at 1.5.
Strategy games before that, and it's always been really interesting to me, kind of like think about how designers think about this balance philosophy. And I think like in kind of the olden days of like strategy games, like the philosophy around was like, okay, balance in all things. We want everything to be able to play against everything else, and everything's perfect. And I think that is kind of a way to look at like a live balance strategy. But I think like the balance in there for us is a little bit of a misnomer designer because, one of the things I think is really our focus from like a product perspective is really what John was talking about earlier, which is we want everything to be able to have its time. And I think it's hard, if not impossible, to get everything to be able to have its time all the time. And so while we do look at balancing and like John was saying, like tone things down and bring things up, we have that space in the middle there that we can play to be able to like move archetypes up and down at any given time to be able to have everything have its time and have its moment. You can have your elites and I can have deep and John can have whatever the heck he likes. And, we have those times that we can do it. And then, people can kind of like bounce between the different things they enjoy playing. So John, if you want to continue on that thread, but I really just wanted to kind of speak to that because that's an interesting kind of topic to think about.
Yeah, I think they covered most of it.
Okay, good. There you
go. So speaking of the elite, certain archetypes, there is a couple of archetypes in this game who have, we'll call it limited deck building. Deep and Lurk are the main two ones that people can probably guess. As a team, how do you approach cards for the archetype?
Yeah, I think these are really actually kind of like fun for me to work on as a designer because you do have to like focus in very tightly on what you're going after. When you're looking at a deck like Lurk, where basically like you want to play lurkers, you want to play as many lurkers as you can, and if you're not playing lurkers, you're making a mistake. We really want to design kind of like things that feed into that aren't just another lurker to throw into the pile. Because as you mentioned, like there's this kind of critical mass at a certain point, like when you get really good of a particular type of unit in a deck that only wants that type of unit, you can kind of push it over the edge. What we prefer to do when we can is to look for opportunities to make a more general use tool that also fits into that deck. I think Blood in the Water is a really good example of what we tried to do here, which is to say, okay, Bilgewater has the ability to do rallies, but we've never really given them a card that exemplifies that. What if we gave them a rally that can work in kind of general Bilgewater decks and has other purposes, but very specifically, it just has the lurker tag on it so that it fits well into the lurker deck. I think Undergrowth for Deep also kind of hit a same note, where it's a good general use Shadow Isles removal spell, but it also has Toss on it, so it's especially good in Deep. And when we get the opportunity to make those kind of callbacks, I think those are really exciting, because it's like the Deep players like Greg see Undergrowth and are like, absolutely, this is what I want in my deck. And then people who are playing Shadow Isles control decks can consider whether or not Undergrowth fits into their strategy as well, and we make multiple people happy with one card.
How long did it take to decide which part of each region's identity to emphasize? Did you make several potential cards supporting different aspects of the region, and then pick the best ones from those, or decide on an identity to support first?
If you don't want me to take this one, Greg. It took a super long time, and it took the whole team. Like the two people who were like most in charge of it, I would say, are David Smith. I think he's on Twitter as Plink, and Tyler Morgan, who's a Riot Dirtle. Tyler is kind of our guru on region balance, and kind of helped identify really like setting the boundaries that we all then kind of like debated and went back and forth on like what each region is good at, where they should have weaknesses, that sort of thing. But then the whole team kind of came together, debated those philosophies, and eventually got to a place that we felt pretty good. And then David really drove on a lot of the kind of like rotation and pulling cards out and putting, focusing which cards we keep in to help identify a region's identity. In terms of making cards for the variety set, that was actually driven by a lot of other people as well. Aaron Barrich and Frank Scarin and Steve Rubin all like helped contribute to this, and then also like Brian Koplek working on set 7 also helped contribute as well. I'm forgetting anyone here. Dan Felder also was helping. I believe he specifically worked on a handful of these cards, like primarily. I think I covered everybody. But yeah, basically the whole team came together and worked on these things. And every time we're making new cards, it's not just like we make one card and we see how it works and then we tune it for like 6 years. We throw a ton of ideas at the wall and kind of like play test in very early balance stages. And you really have to be able to look past like, okay, the numbers on this are very wrong, but the experience is fun. Can we get the numbers to a place where it works? Or vice versa, like this feels functional, but is it ever going to be exciting enough to really feel like a card we want to put in the game? And that kind of debating happens through our playtesting every day. So yeah, for all of these cards that came in this variety set, there were many cards that were made, many more that are on the cutting room floor, many more that are in future releases and are going to show up to players eventually, but just didn't quite make it into this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting piece that John brought up, that like, he named like every designer on the team. And I think like just in kind of reading Twitter like that, I think there's a little bit of like a misconception in terms of like, oh, this person made this card, or this person is the person that did this thing. And one of the things that was really interesting when I joined the team 2 years ago was that like literally it feels like, yeah, we have a lead designer on a project, but every single person gives some kind of input, or at least has the ability to give some kind of input to almost every design decision that like gets made. And so like I see John on Twitter all the time, people like, oh, I think this person did this, and like John chimes in and is like, well, I think actually this person did this one, and this one did this one, and David Smith, everyone's like, oh, Blink card, and it's like, well, actually this person did this one, and so we see that a lot. And I just kind of wanted to call that out as like everyone is like working on everything, and it's like genuinely a huge team effort to bring any single card to players.
Yeah, I can only think of like 2 or 3 cards that have ever made it from like the idea we wrote down on paper to publish to players without any changes. They're all like very simple cards. I think the only one that is coming to mind right now is Jagged Cutlass, the plunder equipment. Basically like had those numbers, that functionality, the first day it was written down, and we just like got lucky, and that was balanced. But even in a card like that, where like one person wrote it down and it made it all the way to release, every single person tested it. Like we all pushed back and forth on whether or not those numbers should go up or go down, or if we should add something else on there. It is 100% a team effort for every design. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I messaged you on Twitter a week ago thanking you for the Badger Bear, and it then got to Plink, and Plink was like, no, it's not me. And it was like, pass the parcel of, I want to thank the person, and no one wanted to take credit for it. It was also...
That is so our team. Like, that is so our team. It's like, no, this person's the awesome one, not me, yeah.
No one wants to... Okay,
beyond just like finding...
No one wants to take the blame for the Badger Bear. Like, no one wants to come ahead and fucking say, I did it! That's my fault! Blame me, Reddit! I am the blocking Badge Bear.
out what strengths we want each region to have as we went through rotation. We also really wanted to emphasize the fact that every region should have weaknesses. It's kind of a like natural function of any card game or any game where you're adding in more pieces over time that the lines get blurred between your various regions. You add in tools that work for a specific archetype and they end up being a little too good, and then they work for everything else. And so one of the goals of rotation is to kind of like refine those areas and make sure that every region has things they're good at and things that they need to go to other regions to like help solve those problems. I think the best example of this probably came in Shadow Isles, where we kind of found that like Shadow Isles removal was often best in class all the way through the game. They often had the best like single target, no questions asked removal in Vengeance. They have the best mass removal in Ruination. They have the best like small damage based removal in a lot of cases in Vile Feast. And so we wanted to really like focus them in on what feels best for them, which in this case, since other regions also do damage removal, we really focused them in on this kind of a thing of like when Shadow Isles kills a unit, it's more about like making sure it's dead, and it has some conditions on it, but they will often do kind of like non-damage based removal, and then rotating out things such as Vile Feast that were kind of giving them the option to also like pick off a nearly dead unit. I know that's going to be tough for a lot of folks because Vile Feast is one of those cards that you think of as like this is Shadow Isles, but having Vile Feast in
Okay. Rotate Pocky, and I'm playing Zoe whole season.
The environment means that often Shadow Isles doesn't have to look as hard for like additional mystic shots or little pings coming out of Bandle City. And removing those kinds of bonus tools mean that now Shadow Isles decks that go to different regions are going to start feeling a lot more different from each other.
I think a lot of people are going to be quite surprised on that one. I think there has been talk about what cards, because it has been a gist of the cards that were mentioned in the article, Aurelia and Vladimir, all explaining why these cards were being removed. And a lot of people have been thinking, not just was cards going, I think some hints about this where mentioned some cards have come in, some cards can be out. I think kind of guess which cards we're talking about there. I've connected some.
There may be one card in the variety set that is very clearly ringing the death knell for someone else.
So it's good to see that these changes, very impactful changes.
Hey, first one.
Vile Feast, I would probably say.
And the chance they'll rotate deny. No, because it's a main identity of Ionia. So, like, they talked why they are rotating the Vile Feast, because they want to focus on SI doing a non-damage removal. That, like, when you play a removal, like, yeah, it can be conditional like Rumble or non-conditional like Vengeance, but the unit stays dead, where Vile Feast, it doesn't belong in that pool, so it's just getting rotated out because it doesn't fit their plan, to their identity that goes towards SI. Where Deny is a main identity of Ionia, it just doesn't let you play the game. Like, Ionia is all about, yeah, you won't play the game. Nope, not today.
Run cards, how good it is.
Yeah, and we should have more notes on like which specific cards are rotated coming out in like upcoming articles. I think definitely it's well beyond just champions. There will be followers, there will be spells. We're not going to rotate every staple effect. Like, obviously there are very good things in the game that are like that feels right to keep in the game. But there are going to be some cards that players have been using for a long time that will no longer be available.
Are variety patches always going to include a small number of cards, or could we see variety patches introduce new champions as well?
So I'll take this one because this is kind of a producer-y thing where a lot of times design or narrative or any of the kind of creative people on the team like have awesome ideas that people work in a specific circumstance, and the producer has to come in and be like, yes, but like what's the highest value we can create at any given time, and then really kind of focus that on like whatever we're doing at any given time. And so one of the things that we've really worked hard on, and obviously this is a collaborative effort across the entire team with like our executive producer Dave Duckin and everybody kind of coming in and giving input. But one of the things we're really trying to do, at least this year, and this is always subject to change, is really try to keep super heavy focus on what is a live balance patch going to be, what is a variety set going to be, and what is a set going to be. And I think while we would love to explore a world in which we could drop a champion in a variety set or something like that, or throw a bunch of really cool cards in a live balance patch or something like that. I think right now, as we're kind of doing this for the first time and really trying to heavily focus our kind of 3-patch cycle, we really just want to have sets be focused on champions. We want to have variety sets be focused on variety cards. And we want to have live balance be focused on live balance. I say that, and we've released some new cards in the live balance patch earlier this year, but I think one of the learnings that we actually took from that was like, this is great, but like, why not just release that in the variety set so that everything can kind of like be cohesive? And so I think you may see some things change after 6 months, a year, something like that, because we took some learnings or we've got player feedback that like, hey, we actually like players really want this, and then we can kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out like what makes sense, and maybe we should look at dropping a champion in a variety set or something like that. But for now, our focus is champions in sets, variety cards in variety sets, and then balance changes in live balance patch. So that is like that's a pretty strong feeling right now that we have, and not even just from like this is the right thing for the product, but this is the right thing for like the health of the team, because every set has different like pipeline and dependencies, and external teams are supporting us in various different ways, and every time you add something else and it adds a workflow on top of something, and it means that we can't deliver something else that we would be able to spend that time on. So anybody wants to know what a producer does, like that is the thing that a producer does. John, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but
yeah, I think I think first off, take Greg's answer at face value. Like, it's not something we're immediately looking at. But hypothetically, if we were going to try and do a champion in a variety set, it would have to be a really unique arrangement, right? Because when we release champions, so we know players are like really attached to our champions in general. They're kind of like how you identify their off and how you name your deck. So when we release a champion, we really want it to land and make sure it has a home somewhere. And part of that is that we release support cards with those champions, so to kind of like make sure that, you know, when you play Jax, there are some cards that feel logical to include the Jax, and it makes sense to go forward with that Jax deck. If we were going to release a champion in a variety set, we'd have much fewer cards to potentially release as support cards. And if we, you know, cannibalize the rest of the set to just support that champion, then we're not hitting the original goal of kind of giving these variety options to a bunch of different decks and helping to really shake up the meta. So even if we were hypothetically to hit that point at some point, it would have to be a very unique champion design that would probably operate in a different way than we've seen before.
You can speculate on what champion that might be, and let me know what you think the unique champion and abilities might end up being. We have some thoughts internally if that's something we end up being able to do in a while. But yeah, there's some unique champions in League of Legends that you might be able
Greg
to.
knows my opinions on this. I've sent him plenty of DMs already.
We actually have like the exact same favorite champ that we both won in the game. So we'll leave it at that.
The community will be getting like wild.
Yeah.
You'll be seeing it everywhere now.
Yeah.
Is rotation going to affect variety sets? Should we expect variety sets to focus on only standard strategies, or will we see Eternal targeted for variety sets too?
Current plan is to focus all of our new releases going into standard and Eternal at the same time. So no Eternal unique new cards at this point. As Greg mentioned before, all of this stuff has the ability to change in the future, but it's really like we want to keep making sure that we get the best bang for a buck with these kinds of releases. And releasing a variety card that impacts both standard and Eternal helps two different types of players get a brand new experience and like shake things up. Whereas if we release something specifically just to Eternal, that only like changes things up for one group. I will say we are looking at Eternal specific balance changes, and that can include things as large as potentially like card reworks or reverts of old buffs and nerfs that we've seen before. So kind of like make sure that environment stays its own unique place and has its own place in the like lore ecosystem.
What existing archetype are you personally most interested in making a new card for, and why?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what I'm going to say. I want to see deep, and actually, I will call out that like one of the awesome things about this team is that like the design team has been encouraging me, because you know, I talk about deep sometimes, has been encouraging me to like come up with a card design for deep, as not a designer, and so you know, I am thinking in my brain about what a variety card might look like in terms of deep. And so if you see not in the next few months, but like in a year, if you see a variety card come out that's deep, it might have been from my brain. So we'll see. But it's something that I'm thinking about and potentially working on. And Greg's first little baby card might be a deep variety card. We'll see.
Yeah, Greg makes a good point that we do actually get a lot of like core ideas from people all over the team. One of our common design practices is when we have like an extra space in the set that we're trying to fill in, we'll open up what we call a bounty board to everybody on the team, and people just kind of like throw various card ideas in, and then we go through and refine them and play test them and get really interesting stuff. So even beyond the design team, like there's even more hands in the pot a lot of the time. In terms of what I would want to buff, so I mentioned before that we work on really long timelines for cards. So in most cases, for archetypes that exist right now, like I feel good about the cards that I've designed.
Cat pulled the plug.
For them, and I like don't really know specifically one that I'm like I gotta get one more card in for that archetype. That said, for archetypes that are coming up, there are a lot that I'm super excited for. The one I'm most excited for is not in this upcoming set, but in the set after. I think there's an archetype in there that has a ton of really exciting design space for future expansion. Like we do really cool things with it in the first set, but it's only the tip of the iceberg on that one, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I think that's all the time that we have for the. Thank you very much, both of you, for spending the time today, and I hope to have you on again.
This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kieran. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Very much, guys.
Good stuff. Oh! A spell shield. Look at me. Good video. Shout out to Marshall doing a good job for the Runeterra community. Not so pompy. Not so. Am I wrong, or does it seem like the game's meta is getting better over time? Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's normal that game gets better over time, no? If the devs are not dumbasses. I can't type my password with one hand. It's literally impossible. I don't remember my password. Like it's crazy. Link about rotation. Yeah, sure. I need to do it with my left hand. Hold up.
Hi guys, a quick apology before the video starts.
Control C. Oh my god, mouse to the chat. Fuck me, that's a hard job. Control V. Boom. Done. Go to play. Let's play a few games. I don't feel like playing too many today. I'll play probably some Last Epoch. But we'll jump to games. Will they do the Hearthstone rotation shit? I don't know what's the rotation shit in the Hearthstone now, but they will do the rotation. Which is good for the game. No miał. Chcesz iść? Any music enjoyers? Loot? Oh shit. Motherfucker or potential motherfucker. Maybe one day I'll play Lurk again. What's my playlist that I choose for streams? I just type in Spotify what I want to listen and I fire it up. Fuck you, Barat. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video and let us know what you think about that one. Kurwa mać!